Bonjour. Mesdames et messieurs, je m'appelle Rodger, je suis australien. Je suis désolé, je ne parle pas français. And I'm not going to try anymore. Thank you very much to Veronique for inviting me here. It's been a wonderful day so far and I'm learning a lot. I'm very excited to be able to share my journey with you and to share some of the experiences that we've had in Australia working with design thinking. So I am Deputy Director at the Designing Out Crime Research Centre. It was a bit of a lengthy path for me to get there. I first studied psychology in my undergraduate degree and I worked with victims of crime in my first role in the New South Wales Public Service, counselling victims of quite serious crime, sexual assault, domestic violence, working with families of homicide victims. I spent a year as New South Wales' homicide clerk, which is not a very joyful job. That period was immensely rewarding though. I was working with people, like George, working with people, and I could see immediate impact that the government department was having in working with these people. Immediate impact in helping them overcome trauma. For me though, it was a difficult job and I was in my early 20s and probably not having the life skills that I needed to be able to make a career out of that. But I was intensely interested in working with victims of crime and working with, I guess, upstream on the prevention of crime. So I went and got a new job in the same department in the Crime Prevention Division. The Crime Prevention Division works with other government agencies, local councils to come up with strategic approaches to preventing crime in communities. I arrived there and realised, back to Miko's point about disciplines, I didn't have the skill set to work in this sector. So whenever I change jobs, it seems I do another degree. I did a Masters of Criminology in order to work out how to be the person that I needed to be at work. So I worked there for a few years and it was great, but I did become frustrated with the discipline area of criminology and I became frustrated with the way we were practicing it. And I'll talk a bit more about that as I go through my presentation. It was 4 years ago and a bit that I came to the University of Technology, Sydney, working with Professor Kees Dorst, who some of you know and some of you will be familiar with, at the Designing Out Crime Research Centre. And I want to pick up the journey there. So about 7 years ago actually, I think it was 2007, the New South Wales Department of Justice, where I was working, put out a call to all of the universities in New South Wales and said, we want to establish a Designing Out Crime Research Centre. And they had a very detailed brief, as government departments are good at doing. They're good at being very specific about what they want. They didn't, so they got responses from a number of universities. The response from the University of Technology completely bucked that brief. It said, we understand what you're asking for, but what you're asking for is a research centre that will look at countermeasures, look at looking at the problem head on and just trying to solve the problem as it presents. And we know design can be used in a much broader sense. We know design can be used to understand the problem in more depth, to reframe the problem and to create new solutions. So to their credit, the New South Wales Department of Justice recognised value in that and awarded the tender to the University of Technology, Sydney. And we've been working on this ever since. So from my background in criminology and crime prevention practice, I was really used to taking on problems as they presented themselves. To me, there weren't many different types of problems. There were just problems that were given to me to solve, and I would look at the problem, do research on what other people had done to solve those problems and implement them in programs. In starting a PhD in design and working in the design area, I became aware that actually there's many different types of problems. There's well-defined and ill-defined. There's open dynamic network problems. There's, as Banny talked about before, there's complicated problems that can be broken down and understood. And then there's complex problems, which are difficult to understand in the traditional ways. So, okay, for me, that's interesting because it seems there's more than one type of problem. And actually, when we look at the literature and look at practice, there's more than one type of approach to problems. So on the left side of the screen are the problem-solving approaches that I was used to applying as a practitioner, as a graduate of 2 degrees, that was set up to work with victims of crime and in crime prevention. The dominant paradigm in criminology was the SARA model. So scan the environment for what other people have done, assess which is going to be useful in your context, apply that, and then evaluate it. And the whole crime prevention movement has been doing that since the 1970s. The other approach that I was used to using was the divide and conquer approach. So a problem presents, you break it down into small parts, and then you try and fix each of those individual parts using the existing resources that you have. Now, both of those approaches are useful and valid. The divide and conquer approach is also similar to an engineering approach, and the Babylonians thought it was pretty good because they wrote about it in 200 BC. When I talk to organisations and that's the only innovation approach they have, I go, guys, we've got 2,000 odd years of knowledge now on different ways of doing things. Let's have a look at what else is out there. So drawing on reflective practice, so the double and triple loop learning framing that Cross and Chern talked about, and other approaches. And drawing on many different approaches to form a portfolio approach to innovation. So when we look at the private sector and innovation, they invest, I think it's about 60 or 70% in incremental change. So doing what they already do better. 20 or 30% I think it is in transformational, so rethinking what their values, what their working principles are, and then a small amount in radical change. I think it's a Harvard Business Review article that shows that the return on investment is actually inverse, so the biggest return on investment comes from those radical approaches. So taking that back to crime prevention practice in New South Wales, we at Designing Out Crime, we target radical innovation. We go for helping organisations rethink, oh, there is more French there, rethink their very purpose for being. And once they've rethought their very purpose for being, rethink their practices, how they operate, and then come up with the solutions to the problems. Now, I'm going to give 3 really quick examples soon. But this is a slide. I studied a bit of business and I worked in a business school too. This is a slide that's often used to talk about groupthink. So the notion that an organisation will just continue to use the problem-solving approaches it has always used. In the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Kennedy administration was quite new and they used the approach that had been developed by the previous administration. So they responded to a military threat with a military response. It was a disaster and almost cost us the earth, I guess. But the administration learned from that and they realised that it wasn't necessarily the response that was wrong, although it kind of was, but it was the way they solved problems. So by the time the Cuban Missile Crisis came around, the administration had been able to realise that a military threat should not be necessarily met with a military response. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was averted through diplomatic means. So that's an example of an organisation being reflective in learning. Now I want to give an example of my practice before I learnt a bit about design and design thinking. So as I said, I was working in government. There was a problem in Australia with alcohol-related violence in an entertainment district that some of you who've heard about our work will be a bit familiar with. It's a place called King's Cross. I was in government when we were trying to solve this problem, and our response was very much to look at the problems, so people getting involved in assaults and people who were drunk getting involved in assaults. And we tried to address those specific things. So we brought in laws around reducing the amount of alcohol that could be sold, reducing the availability of glassware because some people were getting hit with glasses and injured terribly, bringing in security. So really trying to address the problems as they presented. And this is one of the solutions that we, as government, came up with. This is the drunk tank. Now, as I said, I'm kind of new to design. I've only been around learning design for 4 years, and some of my design skills are pretty bad. This is a storyboard done by me, not my 8-year-old daughter, sorry, 8-month-old daughter, although she'd probably do a better job. So in King's Cross, if you're drunk and the police see that you're drunk and they say, hey, you should go home because you're drunk, and if you refuse, they can take you down to the police station. And they can then put you in a car. I swear that's a car. I really do. And they drive you 2.5 kilometres to the nearest courthouse, where they have you assessed by a medico to ensure that you are drunk and not suffering from another illness, and then hand you over to the sheriff, who locks you in a drunk cell for 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hours, they fine you $200 and you're allowed to go home. Bit of a calculation on that, and the monetary cost to that, about $1,000 to the state. There's 8 drunk tanks, but King's Cross quite often gets about 30,000 young people out on the street on a Friday and Saturday night. So this is a rational response to part of a problem. It's an example of this kind of problem solving, but it's not an answer to the question, what can we do to prevent alcohol-related violence? If the question is, what tools can we give police to better do their job, perhaps it's an answer to that. So we need a different way of working. Because if the problem is only ever approached as if it is a crime problem, then the response can only ever be a crime response. If the problem is approached through a new frame, so a new way of looking at it, then the response can be anything. And I'll give an example of a project that we did now 6 years ago, and then 2 other examples to illustrate our method. And this example is probably one of our best examples of radical innovation within an organisation. So the organisation that we worked with was the City of Sydney. They're the local government authority that manages King's Cross, as well as a number of government agencies. Their approach had been to treat this as a crime problem. They had a unit within their organisation called the Safe Cities Unit, and it was their job to come up with strategies to prevent the opportunities for crime. Now, in working with them, this is my team and my network of people that I work with in Sydney. We're multidisciplinary. So in working with the City of Sydney, we have architects, we have urban planners, computer scientists, historians, industrial designers. So in working with the City of Sydney, we have all of these disciplines to draw on. And we do it in a collaborative way. So we do it in workshops. This is a picture of a workshop that we had a few years ago to form the most recent brief that we did on King's Cross. And it's just an example of finding a neutral space, so bringing the organisations together who've been probably at loggerheads for years, but every time they meet about this issue, they have their organisational hat on and they're flying their organisational flag, defending their position around the problem. So bringing them to a neutral territory like this around a design methodology helped us really humanise the situation. We work in probably 3 ways. This is our operating model. When we have a problem, we do a research stage, we initiate the project with events, we do frame creation, then design exploration, business design, and then hand it over into a delivery stream and handover. So how we do that is informed very much by Professor Case Dorst and his frame creation methodology. But as I said, we're a multidisciplinary team. At our peak, there's about 12 or 14 of us. We'd worked together for about 2 years as a multidisciplinary team. And as a manager, it was very difficult for me to understand what the strengths were of those many different disciplines. I don't know a lot about architecture, don't know a lot about industrial design. Nevertheless, we worked together for 2 years. After 2 years, we kind of realised that, all right, we're still multidisciplinary. We're still just doing what we're good at individually. And yes, we're uniting around this frame innovation model. But actually, what are we doing? What are our practices? So we looked back at all of the projects we've done and broke each project down into methods. So we identified which methods we'd used on each project and created method cards, a lot like the IDEO method cards, inspired by them. So each card has the person who's brought that methodology to the centre. It has advice on why you would use it, where you would use it in the project and when. So this card here is a history of past attempts. It comes from our historian and it gives a case study where it's been used and advice on when it can be used. If you put them together in a shape, you can map out a project, map out the research project. And that's really handy when working with clients and partners who are used to just following a linear approach. This has 4 sides, so you can go off on tangents. And it's a device that enables you to have that conversation with them. They also fly, so please pay attention. Otherwise, you'll get hit. If you catch one of these, pass it around and just get a bit of a feel for what they are. I think the best thing about these cards are that they fly in a very unpredictable manner. But it gave us as a team the opportunity to value each other's skills and reform around the frame creation methodology. So this is Professor Dorst's book. It's recently published through MIT Press and it details a lot of our case studies and the thinking behind it. But really quickly, the methodology is the result of years of research into, or drawing on design research and research into expert problem solving. Now, in his research, Professor Dorst found that the top designers really follow a pattern of behaviour. They don't try to solve the problem immediately as it presents. Rather, they take in archaeology. They ask the question, what's been tried before and to what extent has that been successful? They then ask, what makes this problem so hard to solve? Who has been involved? Who could be involved? What are the themes? And this is the really important part. What are the commonly held values amongst the organisations involved and amongst the users and the people? How create new frames from those themes? Then the future step is a design exploration, showing how that frame might be implemented, transformation, implementing it, and integration, making this part of the problem-solving toolkit. Here's the long-awaited example. This is a bit of our workshop methodology. So in the King's Cross Hotel, a couple of years ago, we brought together police, local council, residents, partygoers, and we talked to them about the problem. And we asked the question, who has been involved in the problem? So City of Sydney venue owners, taxis, patrons. Who could be involved? The media could be involved. The general public could be involved. The music industry could be involved. So if all of these people could be involved, what's important to them? And not what's important to them in relation to the problem, because if we ask that question, we're only designing from the problem. But what's important to them as an organisation? What gets their people who come to work every day out of bed in the morning? If they're user groups, what's important to them as users? So, for example, the music industry are interested in performance, they're interested in audience. The patrons are interested in blowing off steam, having accessibility, having fun. We use that as data, as in the previous presentation, but data not in a numerical sense, but in a let's get to a deeper meaning. So we take those concepts and cluster them into like clusters. So fun, experience, vibrancy. And we ask the question, what does that mean? What does that mean? Fun, experience, vibrancy, friends, diversity. We think that in the context of King's Cross, that probably means something like identity forming. But we don't leave it there. We're not experts in identity forming, so we go and talk to people who know a bit about identity forming, or we tell personal stories about when we've formed identity, or we read a novel, or share crappy YouTube clips of 80s music, or poems, or whatever, and come back together and ask the question again, do we still think it's about identity forming, or is it about something else? And in this case, we thought it was also about a rite of passage. So the young people in King's Cross, they're not going there to commit crime, they're going there as part of a journey in their life, part of a growing up experience. So on the left column, we have the old problem frame, alcohol-related crime, and we have the old solution frame, crime prevention. On the right, if we try to create an experience that is about identity and vibrancy, a rite of passage, we ask the question, who's good at providing a rite of passage experience? Who's good at bringing 30,000 young people together for that kind of experience? And the answer, of course, is music festivals. So if we treat this inner suburban area as a music festival, what are some of the things that we can do? At this point, we hand it over to our wonderful design students to do a design exploration. And yeah, please. And they do a 3D render. Yep. So in King's Cross, 30,000 young people out there. There's only 2 public toilets in King's Cross. So let's think about bringing in some portable urinals to reduce the street urination. A music festival also has bump in and bump out transport. It has crowd control. Crowd control is very different to security. It's a different skill set. It's a different frame. A diversity of experiences that don't just rely on alcohol. And really trying to create something, not lock things down. So coming out of this work that we did a number of years ago now was the Open Sydney policy. Open Sydney is the Sydney City's policy. It's got 200 action items. Coming out of this was also them establishing a nighttime economy team within their organisation. So a transformation at that organisational level around working principles. And then the 200 action items. 2 other really quick examples. This is a maximum security prison. I've never been there yet. This is the classroom within the maximum security prison. The former Commissioner of Corrections in New South Wales had worked his way up to the level of Commissioner from being a prison guard. A wonderful story of achievement. But he'd also taken some pretty strong views about what prison was for to that role. So these were the education facilities for prisons. The new Commissioner had a different vision. The new Commissioner wanted it not to be about security and punishment, but to be about rehabilitation through education. Now, unfortunately, there weren't the purpose-built classrooms that were needed for adult learning. So this is part of the team. On the bottom right is Rowan Lulham, the project director of this project. Douglas Tompkin, Kevin Bradley, and Tasman Munro is off. I think he took the photo. But we brought together the Commissioner's office. We brought together the teachers, the security, all of the parties within the corrective services organisation that had been at loggerheads around this issue and unable to form a good brief. And we put them through a design thinking process. We talked to prisoners. We got to understand what they wanted. What they really wanted deep down, after quite a bit of analysis and talking with them, was connection and reforming an identity. And it wasn't going to be achieved just through a classroom. It would be achieved through a learning pathway. So what are the steps on that pathway? We then co-designed and built the new classrooms with prisoners in another jail. This is it being craned in over the walls. No one escaped on the way out after this, I'm told. This is the outdoor area for them to sit as part of their lessons and learning. And this is indoor. The tables are designed specifically so that they can't be put in straight rows. They have to be used in a collaborative setup. And I don't have pictures of people in there, but there's evidence that they're growing tomatoes and enjoying the space. So the first 2 cohorts have been through in that. That project is now almost 2 years old, but the first 2 cohorts of learners have been through there. I'll skip this. So back to me. This is me about a year ago leading a workshop with the victim services, so where I started in the public service. We were asked by the Secretary of the Department and the Deputy Secretary of the Department and the Commissioner to lead a transformation workshop, bringing together a bunch of stakeholders of victims of crime. So we did it, this is our studio, we did it using some of the tools that I've already shown, but the most important thing there was to get a diverse range of people around. So we had victims advocates, we had people from the justice system. And for me, this was, I guess, full circle, because I'd left victim services feeling unable to actually help anymore. I'd gone to criminology to try and find out what the answers were. I realised that they had some answers, but they didn't have all the answers. So I'd gone then to design to find different ways of solving problems. And it was a great honour to lead this workshop with my colleagues using lots of post-it notes. This is part of the report that's just been published by the government. So coming out of that one-day workshop and then a couple of months of work with the department, we have 6 initiatives, 6 solution directions that I hope will be involved in prototyping and developing. So improving the court experience for victims of crime through to judicial education. The future, I think, is pretty bright. I think the most important things for us have been the mix of practice, research and education. In a university setting, having that mix is really key. Also, being partners with a government organisation and them integrating design thinking into their innovation portfolio has been a wonderful opportunity for us to do research in this field. So I look forward to seeing you next time and showing you more results on this work and other work, and I look forward to the rest of the day. Mes amis, merci.